Our next disorder is panic disorder, and as you might expect from the name, the defining characteristic of panic disorder is that an individual experiences recurrent, unexpected panic attacks. So remember that a panic attack is an abrupt surge of intense fear or discomfort that reaches a peak within minutes and is accompanied by 4 or more symptoms. So those symptoms included physiological symptoms like increased heart rate, feeling like your heart is pounding or having heart palpitations, sweating, trembling or shaking, shortness of breath, and also included some psychological experiences, things like derealization, so feeling like things around you aren't real, depersonalization, feeling like you are not in the world, a fear of losing control, a fear of going crazy, or a fear of dying. So in panic disorder, an individual is not only experiencing panic attacks, they are experiencing recurrent panic attacks, so their panic attacks are happening more than once, and they're also experiencing unexpected panic attacks. So we can also call these uncued panic attacks. So remember that panic attacks can occur in the context of many different disorders, and even individuals without any disorder can experience a panic attack. So you might, for example, see a panic attack in the context of a specific phobia when an individual is exposed to their phobic stimulus. So someone with a fear of spiders might experience a panic attack if faced with a large surprise spider. An individual with social anxiety disorder might experience a panic attack if they need to give a public presentation or performance. Those are not necessarily indicative of panic disorder because we can see panic attacks across our various anxiety disorders. Panic disorder, in contrast, an individual is having recurrent panic attacks where they can't identify any specific cue that is leading to these recurrent panic attacks. In addition to these recurrent uncued panic attacks, at least one of these panic attacks is followed by at least 1 month of one of 2 changes to behavior. So the first could be a psychological change. So the individual experiences persistent concern or worry about experiencing further panic attacks. So because they've had recurrent unexpected panic attacks, they're very worried about having more panic attacks in the future or about the potential consequences of panic attacks. So they're very worried that this means something bad for their physical health or something bad about their mental health. Or the individual may experience at least a month of significant changes to their behavior related to the attacks. So for example, someone might change their behavior in order to avoid physical sensations that they are worried are going to trigger a panic attack. So for example, they might avoid engaging in exercise because they're worried that getting out of breath and having a pounding heart will bring on a panic attack. They might avoid things like watching scary movies that they're worried will lead them to have a panic attack, or even things like engaging in sex and being worried about the physiological consequences of that, being worried that that could bring on a panic attack. So significant changes in behavior related to the panic attacks. So the key criterion for panic disorder is not only the presence of these recurrent unexpected panic attacks, but that the response to these panic attacks involves significant changes to behavior. Either that the person is really worried about these recurrent panic attacks and that they are spending time worrying about having future panic attacks, or that they are changing their behavior in some significant way in order to avoid future panic attacks. A related disorder, agoraphobia, is often closely related to panic disorder. So agoraphobia is characterized by marked fear or anxiety about at least 2 of the following situations. So this might be using public transportation, being in open spaces, being in enclosed spaces, standing in line, being in a crowd, or being outside of the home alone. And the nature of the fear that characterizes agoraphobia is that the individual fears or avoids these situations because of concerns that they may not be able to escape or that they may not be able to access help if they experience a panic attack or other embarrassing symptoms. So this looks very similar to our diagnostic criteria for specific phobias and for social anxiety disorder. So we have marked fear or anxiety of a specific situation. In this case, the situation is a set of concerns about situations in which a person might experience a panic attack or other symptoms. And the nature of the fear is that the person is worried that they might not be able to escape or get help if they experienced a panic attack or other embarrassing symptoms. So one way to think about agoraphobia is that it is anxiety about panic or related anxiety symptoms. So the thing that the person is afraid of is that they are going to have a panic attack or another embarrassing experience and they won't be able to get out or they won't be able to get help. Just like our other phobias, the agoraphobic situations almost always provoke fear or anxiety. The agoraphobic situations are either actively avoided, they may require the presence of a companion, so a person may be able to endure their agoraphobic situations, but only with, say, a partner or a child with them, or these situations are endured with intense fear or anxiety if the person is not able to avoid them. Just like our other phobias, the fear or anxiety is disproportionate to the real danger posed by the agoraphobic situations. And it's also persistent, so again, typically persists for longer than 6 months, and causes clinically significant distress or impairment. We typically see panic disorder and agoraphobia presenting together. So most individuals with agoraphobia also meet criteria for panic disorder. There are cases in which individuals can meet criteria for agoraphobia without meeting criteria for panic disorder. So many people with agoraphobia experience this anxiety because they are worried about having a panic attack, but individuals can also develop agoraphobia if they are worried about other consequences. So for example, an individual with irritable bowel syndrome might develop agoraphobia if they're worried about experiencing gastrointestinal distress in a public situation and not being able to escape and not being able to get help. So you might have the same kinds of behaviors and fears that characterize agoraphobia that is typical of panic attacks with other kinds of physical or psychological experiences. But often when we see agoraphobia, we are seeing it in combination with panic disorder, that a person experiences recurrent panic attacks, they're worried about the panic attacks, they change their behavior, and one specific element of that is that they develop a fear of situations where they might experience a panic attack and be unable to escape or get help. Our final DSM anxiety disorder is generalized anxiety disorder. So as you might guess from the name, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is characterized by excessive anxiety and worry about a number of events or activities. So it is generalized. It's not specific to one topic. This anxiety occurs over a period of at least 6 months and leads to clinically significant distress or impairment. So the person is bothered by their worries or experiences problems functioning in major roles or meeting major role obligations as a result of this anxiety and worry. So an important term to define here is worry. And worry refers to repetitive negative thoughts about the future. So if we think about repetitive thoughts, one way that we can characterize repetitive thoughts is by thinking about where they are oriented in time. So for example, when you read about ruminative response styles theory, you learned that rumination is a coping response characterized by thinking about emotional experiences, particularly thinking about the past. So rumination is repetitive negative thought that is focused on the past. When we talk about obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders, we'll talk about obsessions. Obsessions are repetitive negative thoughts often focused on the present moment. In contrast, worries are repetitive negative thoughts about the future. How am I going to do on this exam? What's going to happen tomorrow? Will my date like me? What am I going to wear tomorrow? Do I have everything that I need for my next class? All of those are examples of worries, so repetitive thoughts about the future that are negative in character. So in generalized anxiety disorder, these anxiety and worries are about multiple kinds of events or activities. So it's not necessarily just worrying about health or just worrying about work or just worrying about global warming, but an individual has excessive anxiety and worry in multiple domains. This excessive anxiety and worry is persistent, And these worries are difficult to control, so the person does not feel that they are able to manage and control their worries about all of these different topics. In addition to this key component of uncontrollable worry, this anxiety is associated with at least 3 additional symptoms. So these might include feelings of restlessness or feeling keyed up or on edge, so a high sense of kind of nervous anxiety or energy, feeling easily fatigued or tired, having difficulty concentrating, irritability, feelings of muscle tension, or sleep disturbances or insomnia. So the key feature of generalized anxiety disorder are these pervasive, uncontrollable, persistent worries, and these pervasive, uncontrollable, persistent worries are accompanied by other distressing or impairing symptoms of anxiety. So if we think about our anxiety disorders overall, one way of thinking about our anxiety disorders is by distinguishing between anxiety disorders that are primarily characterized by a fear response, so a response to a real or perceived threat in the environment that's currently present, compared to an anxiety response, so thinking about a future potential threat. If we think about our specific phobias and our social phobias, those are primarily characterized by fear responses. So a specific phobia is a marked fear of a specific phobic object, whether that is an animal, a feature of the natural environment, or a specific kind of situation. Social phobia or social anxiety disorder is very similar, except the phobic object is some kind of social situation, either generalized if they're general social situations, or the performance-only subtype if we're restricted to public speaking or other performance situations. And remember that the nature of the fear in social phobia is also specific. So in a specific phobia, the nature of the fear is going to depend on the phobic object. In social phobia, the nature of the fear is that the person is afraid that they're going to be negatively evaluated. Moving along the spectrum, we can think about panic disorder. So panic disorder has a component of fear because of those recurrent unexpected panic attacks. So recurrent unexpected panic attack is really characterized by that fear response. But in addition, we have an element of anxiety. Either the person is worrying about future panic attacks, or they are changing their behavior to avoid future panic attacks. This is more extreme in agoraphobia, where the person is experiencing a marked fear of situations where they might experience a panic attack or other embarrassing symptoms, and where they are changing their behaviors in ways to avoid experiencing those symptoms. So they might be avoiding going out in public, they might be avoiding going to stores. At its most severe end, individuals with agoraphobia can be entirely housebound, that any situation that provides a risk of experiencing a panic attack is avoided because of these concerns that they'll have a panic attack and not be able to escape or get help. So that's characterized by a high level of anxiety. And then at the anxiety end of the spectrum, we've got our generalized anxiety disorder. So individuals who are experiencing a high level of worry, they're worrying about multiple topics, their worries are persisting over a long period of time, and their worries are uncontrollable, and they're experiencing a range of symptoms related to that worry. So one way of thinking about these anxiety disorders and how we distinguish them from one another is thinking about what is the characteristic response. So is it a more fear response or is it an anxiety response? We can think about the nature of the situation that is prompting the fear or anxiety response. Is it a specific kind of object or situation? Is that specific object or situation a social situation? And what is the nature of the fear? So is it a fear of the object itself? Is it a fear of negative evaluation? Or is it a fear of having a panic attack or other symptoms and being unable to get away? So answering those questions about the fear or anxiety response can help you determine which of these anxiety disorders is the most appropriate diagnosis in a given situation.